Welcome to this edition of GOVO Omaha, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Karina Hernandez, Director at Large for the League, and your host for today's program. Today we're talking to Claire Wiebe, the Senior Manager of Public Affairs at Planned Parenthood, about reproductive rights in Nebraska. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization and does not endorse political candidates or parties. The League does, however, take positions on issues. Our purpose is to empower voters and defend democracy. GOVO Omaha primarily focuses on policy issues, and as a result of our discussions, we hope you will feel ready to make informed decisions at election time. In January of this year, Legislative 626 was introduced and would ban abortions around 6 weeks of pregnancy. The League of Women Voters attended a press conference opposing the bill and submitted testimony on February 1st. We also sent a letter to state senators outlining our position against reproductive rights restrictions. Claire Wiebe from Planned Parenthood is joining us to discuss more about the bill and reproductive rights in Nebraska. So thank you so much for being here, Claire.
Of course, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I just gave a little bit of, our position from the League on LB 626. What else can you tell us about the bill that maybe people should know? What is happening with it right now?
Absolutely. So like you said earlier, LB 626 is an abortion ban. It would ban abortion around 6 weeks of pregnancy. So I think many of us who have menstrual cycles know we often don't know that we're even pregnant before 6 weeks. So it really takes away the option for a lot of Nebraskans to have an abortion. And that doesn't even include people who may need an abortion for medical reasons at a later stage in pregnancy. And all sorts of other situations in which people might need an abortion. Right now, as it stands, the bill there are three kind of rounds of voting and rounds of debate on bills. So the bill has had its hearing. It went out of committee onto general file, which is that first round of voting. It was filibustered on general file, and in order to override the filibuster and continue the bill's progression, people who support the abortion ban needed 33 votes, and they got exactly 33. So now it's on that second round of voting, which is select file. And that's what we're going to see next week, actually, on the 27th of April, which is a Thursday. They'll be debating that bill for 4 hours on select file. We expect another filibuster. And again, to override that filibuster, they will need 33 votes. We are one vote away from beating this abortion ban, so that's where all of our effort over the next week is going to be focused, is like, who is going to be that one vote who's brave enough to stand up for women in Nebraska and people who need abortions?
Wow, yeah, that's super important. We're going to talk a little bit more about how people can generally get involved and how they can help your efforts.
Totally.
But I wanted to first discuss, I know we have a little bit of time here, so I think people might not know, what are the current laws or regulations in Nebraska?
Absolutely. I think there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of confusion around abortion, not only in Nebraska, but also across the country, especially after our Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which happened last summer, almost a year ago, or a little over a year ago. And since then, the decision about how to regulate abortion has really been left up to the states. So we've seen some states that have really expanded access to abortion in light of this decision. Our friends in Minnesota, for example, have really expanded access. And we've seen a lot of states like Texas, states like Florida, and now states like Nebraska are really trying to roll back access and make it really, really difficult for people to access abortion in their state. So across the country, we've seen like a huge amount of damage and fallout because of this. We've seen people denied care for all sorts of reasons. We've seen people, there's a story about a 10-year-old being forced to travel over state lines to get access to an abortion after she was raped. And that kind of story is becoming more and more common as we see these regulations. And in Nebraska, I think it's also important to know that we already have a bunch of abortion restrictions on our books. So we were one of the first states in the country to pass a pre-viability abortion ban, which Roe ideally would have prevented, but it didn't in this case. So we have a ban on abortions after 20 weeks. We also have a 24-hour waiting period. So before you get an abortion in Nebraska, you have to listen to a recording on the phone that includes medically inaccurate information about abortion. And you have to do that at least 24 hours prior to your appointment. So if my appointment's Tuesday, 2 p.m., and I listen to that recording Monday at 3 p.m., I have to wait that extra hour. We have that waiting period in place. We also have a lot of restrictions around minors' access to abortion, and I think that particularly affects minors who don't have, parents in their life, whether they are foster kids or they don't have supportive parents who they can tell about what's going on in their lives. And then beyond, all of the legal restrictions, what we also have is huge geographic and financial barriers for people. So in Nebraska, all of the abortion providing clinics are located on the eastern part of the state. So imagine, you're in a position of needing an abortion, but you live maybe 4, 5, 7 hours from the nearest abortion provider. So now not only are you dealing with all these other little restrictions and little things that Nebraska puts in place to make it harder to get an abortion, you're also thinking about taking time off. And maybe you don't have paid time off for sick leave. If you have other kids, you're trying to find childcare for them. If you're driving 7 hours, you might need a hotel room overnight, and that's an extra cost. And then there's food, and that's a cost. And maybe you need someone to drive you because you don't want to drive yourself home after your procedure. That's another person who's now having to figure out their life to help you get to your appointment. So all sorts of restrictions. And the last one I'll mention is that Nebraska also has a ban on telemedicine abortion. So in situations like that, you have to be physically in the office rather than accessing, for example, many states are able to send medication abortion to your front door and you can just take care of yourself at home. And in Nebraska, that's actually illegal right now. So there's so many barriers, not only codified in our laws, but also just in practice with how difficult it is to access reproductive health care in general in our state.
Right. So that is a lot of information, and I think a lot of aspects to think about, a lot of barriers.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Planned Parenthood then.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of services does Planned Parenthood offer in Nebraska, and how do these services help support reproductive health and rights in the state?
For sure. So we do a lot at Planned Parenthood. We have 2 clinics in Nebraska, so one in Omaha. Our clinic here is around 93rd and Maple, and in Lincoln at 48th and Old Cheney. At those 2 clinics, we have nurses and doctors ready to provide healthcare. So we do a full range of sexual and reproductive healthcare services, so stuff like STI testing and treatment. We do a lot of birth control appointments, annual exams. So if you need your annual gynecologic exam, you can come to Planned Parenthood. What else do we do? We also, I want to make it clear that we offer healthcare services for people of all genders. And then at both of our clinics, we also offer abortion care. So we do surgical, so procedural in-clinic procedures, and then we also offer medication abortion too. In both of our clinics, and that's been a really important part of our service. We actually see a lot of patients coming from outside of the state of Nebraska right now because of the bans in other states. Finally, we also offer LGBTQ inclusive healthcare services, and that includes gender-affirming hormone therapy, which is another issue in the legislature this year. They're trying to ban access to that for minors. So a lot is on the line with this legislative session.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is. You talked a little bit about some of the barriers that people face outside of what Nebraska has put into place. Is there any other, like, what are the biggest challenges I'm asking that individuals and families face when seeking reproductive health in Nebraska? And how does Planned Parenthood address these challenges?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. Just like I think, reproductive health care is just another aspect of healthcare. And I think across, the entire field, there are huge amounts of barriers for folks accessing any type of care. Reproductive health care, though, in Nebraska is particularly difficult to access. There are a lot of areas in the state where there is no OB-GYN, like obstetrician in your county. So say you're pregnant, you might have to travel an hour or two to get to those prenatal appointments. We also see financial barriers, of course, just like with any aspect of healthcare. And services can be pretty limited, especially in rural areas. Access to that affordable service is pretty limited as well. So as far as addressing them, we have a really, really awesome team at Planned Parenthood. We do offer sliding scale appointments for people. We also have a bunch of really awesome grant programs here in Nebraska where we can offer, for example, if you're under 24 in the Omaha area, you can get free birth control at Planned Parenthood. Any method that you want, insertion, removal, all of that will be covered. So yeah, we have a lot of options for folks to get access affordably. What we see is demand is just rising for our services, and so that's a really big challenge too. It's like getting people there for appointments because we have so much need in our community.
Yeah. And how do people usually book appointments with you?
Absolutely. So we have several different ways. We also offer telemedicine, which I also want to say. We can't provide abortion via telemedicine, but we can do a lot of other stuff. So gender affirming healthcare we can provide, as well as, STI screenings. If you have a UTI, we have an app that you can go and enter your symptoms. And that's all on our website. We also, you can call us anytime, and then you can also book appointments online too.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty easy. And I know you said that you're getting a lot of, that you're really busy with that. I guess one of the challenges might be that there's a lot of need, and you said 2 clinics, right? So is there, how long does it typically take, I guess, for people to hear back or get in for an appointment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends on the service. So when we're talking about abortion, Nebraska law requires that MDs, so medical doctors, do abortion services. So our challenge has been finding people to provide abortion services. We currently have a team of, I don't know how many, a bunch of different doctors, some of whom fly in once a month or twice a month to provide services. So abortion care is going to be our longer wait time, which also makes bills like LB 626 so problematic. For other services, it might depend, and we also do some walk-in services as well. So,
yeah, and I think that's good to know too. That it might take a little while to get into the appointment.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the most common misconceptions or myths about reproductive rights and healthcare in Nebraska? And how does Planned Parenthood work to address some of these misconceptions?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about reproductive health care and abortion in particular, there are so many misconceptions and myths, especially right now after the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe. The big one I hear is that people think abortion is not legal in Nebraska, and I'm here to say abortion is safe and legal in Nebraska as we speak. However, it's really on the line. So right now, abortion is safe and legal. I can't speak for 2 weeks from now, unfortunately. I think we also see a lot of stigma around abortion services. We see a lot of like, oh, well, let's not talk about it, or fear of talking about the issue. I think especially when we do work in like rural areas of our state, people are really afraid to talk about how they feel about abortion, despite the fact that like 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have an abortion in their lifetime. Abortion is very common. It's very normal. Abortion is something that a lot of people go through, and as a society, we've stigmatized it so much that people think they're alone in that. And I want to say that you're not alone. 1 in 4 people will need an abortion at some point in their lifetime, and I would guarantee everybody knows and loves someone who has had an abortion. The other place where we see a lot of myths and misconceptions is because of our state's lack of comprehensive sexual education standards. So, there's so many like little things that I've heard over the years, like when I'm like at an event representing Planned Parenthood, that I have to be like, who told you that? So there's just like a whole lot of stuff that people don't know about their basic anatomy and physiology and healthy relationships and consent that really need to be addressed and really could be addressed through quality sexual health education, which is another service that we offer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does that service look like?
Totally. So it really depends on the setting. We have a really awesome team of like highly qualified sexual health educators who work across the state. So often schools will invite us in and we'll do a lesson during a health class or teach a unit. And by we, I mean our educators, not me. We also will offer that to community groups. So all ages. I know we have some educators who have taught like Montessori kindergartners, like safe touch, stuff like that. We can do it for adults too. We do it in often people who are incarcerated we'll do sex ed for as well. So it's really like whoever wants sex ed, we will come and teach it, and we'll give that context too. So, and I think sex ed encompasses so much more than people really think. It's not only, how to keep yourself safe from STIs, how to protect yourself from a pregnancy that you don't want, but also, what does a healthy relationship look like? What does consent look like? How can I make sure that the people around me are treating me with respect? All of that stuff is also included in sex ed.
Well, that's amazing, and I think that's like a really big step, that education piece.
For sure.
To talking about some of these things as well. So this next question, I'm asking generally about how people can be supportive of reproductive rights and access to healthcare, but also if you'd like to speak to how people can be supportive to LB 626.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think I'll start with 626 because that's like top of mind right now. The big thing we need every single person in the state to do is to contact their state senator and let them know not only that you're against abortion bans, but why. People with personal stories, we often lean on people with medical expertise, but everybody has a reason that they're against abortion bans. Even if you haven't had an abortion or you don't know someone who does, you may still be against abortion bans because for you it's an issue of like, the government shouldn't be telling me what to do with my body. So that's step number one. I think we're also asking people, be at the Capitol on Thursday, witness the vote, hold senators to account in a very visible way. The vast majority of Nebraskans are against abortion bans, and we need to be there and physically demonstrate to senators who don't think that that is the case, despite poll after poll after poll, that Nebraskans really care about this issue and that Nebraskans really don't want to see abortion bans. Beyond that, I think it's so important for all of us to have really good conversations with the people around us about why we support reproductive rights. So, like I mentioned earlier, stuff like this is really stigmatized sometimes, and it's not talked about, or if it is talked about, it's like, maybe even not talked about with like the male members of your family or your male friends, but like my girlfriends and I will have that conversation. I think it's so important to just be open about our experiences with reproductive rights, be open with our opinions, and making sure that, if a bill like 626 passes, the reality is that people are still going to need abortions. People are still going to be able to access abortions. So making sure that we're all doing our research and our prep work so that we can be a resource for our community. And really, if someone calls me up, I'm going to be able to be like, okay, let's get you the care that you need. I think there's a lot of work we need to do to get ourselves ready. To that end, if I can also mention, there are organizations called abortion funds, and Nebraska has a really awesome abortion fund called Nebraska Abortion Resources. Those organizations not only fund the cost of procedures for folks, they also will cover the cost of travel. So if a ban like 626 was to pass in Nebraska and say, I'm 8 weeks pregnant, I'm 12 weeks pregnant, whatever, I have to travel out of state, I could lean on an organization like Nebraska Abortion Resources to help me pay for my travel to Colorado, for example. So there's a lot we can do to make sure that our community has the care that we all need.
And where can people go to get some of this information?
Absolutely. So Planned Parenthood, along with a bunch of other really awesome organizations like the ACLU of Nebraska, IB Black Girl, Nebraska Appleseed, and the Women's Fund of Omaha, and Nebraska Abortion Resources, we are all part of a coalition called Nebraskans for Abortion Access. We have a website, nebraskansfораbortionaccess.com, where we'll keep the public up to date on what's going on in the legislature and how they can get healthcare services. Just knowing your rights around this stuff is really, really important. So,
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that's a big aspect of it is, people might be missing information, might want to get involved. So, for contacting your senator, what does that look like for folks?
Totally. So I think it sounds really intimidating, but I always like to remind people, senators are just normal people, especially in Nebraska where we do have this citizen legislature. They're just like your neighbor, right? Contacting them is also pretty easy. You can call or email them. If you go to the Nebraska legislature website, there's a sidebar, and on that sidebar there's something that says find your senator. Click on that, enter your address, and it'll take you to your senator. It shows you their phone number and their email address. And all you have to do is call and say, hi, for example, my name's Claire. I live in your district and I am opposed to LB 626 and any other abortion bans because blah, blah, blah reason. Or you can just keep it simple and short and call and say, hey, I'm opposed to LB 626. And what the senators will do with that information is they'll either keep a tally of pros and cons. Their staff will probably take a note of what you said, who you are, and then they'll give that information to the senator.
Yeah, I think that's really important to know where to start. We're getting closer to the end of our time here. So I guess we've talked a little bit about this, but what advice would you give to someone who is seeking reproductive health care or support in Nebraska? And how can they get involved in this advocacy efforts?
For sure. So I think there's, especially right now, in this moment, there are so many different layers of the conversation around I need to access reproductive health care services. I would always say our website is a really great place to start. We have a ton of information on there too, even if you're do I need to go to the doctor for this? There's a ton of information on our website that's easy to read and easy to access. I would also give the advice, if LB 626 were to pass and become law, and you need an abortion, I would say that we all have to be very careful with what we are putting into the internet. Even in Nebraska, we've already seen a case where a young woman is being prosecuted because she used Facebook Messenger to talk with someone else about her abortion. And so I think, and that's, it's not a normal case, but I would say we all need to be very aware that our web search history Our conversations online can be tracked and have historically been tracked to prosecute people for accessing healthcare, which is too bad. So I would say be very careful about your internet use. Also be very careful that you're not, finding out misinformation or disinformation. Again, Planned Parenthood is a great resource. Nebraskans for Abortion Access will have some resources on there too. There's a website called abortionfinder.org, and that's a nationwide website where you can type in and find a reputable abortion provider in your area, because there's also a lot of anti-abortion websites that will kind of pretend to be super open and super honest, and then you get a little deeper and you're like, there's not any actual information on here, and that's because they are trying to persuade you not to have an abortion. So a lot of different aspects to this. I would just say be really careful, especially if 626 passes. And I hate to be negative, but that's the reality of what we're looking at right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So leading up to next week, then making sure to contact your senator.
Yep.
And then show up on Thursday. Do you know the time?
Yeah, we expect they'll start around 9 o'clock, and it's 4 hours of debate on that second round. So we imagine 9-ish to 3-ish, but couldn't tell you exact times, probably until the night before. But they're only going until 3 p.m. that day, so we know at least it's going to be that chunk of time somewhere in there.
Okay. Well, we've gotten to the end of our time here. So thank you so much, Claire, for being here and sharing information. And would you just share the website again where people can go to get more information?
It's nebraskansforabortionaccess.com.
Okay.
Really great resource. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to tell us more about LB 626 and more about Planned Parenthood.
Of course.
For the League of Women Voters, I'm Karina Hernandez, reminding you to inform yourself about issues and candidates, and on Election Day, be ready to go vote Omaha.